Hey guys, tonight we're sneaking through candlelit corridors where holy women in rough woolen habits are committing what might be history's most righteous tax fraud. You're about to discover that medieval nuns weren't just praying and copying manuscripts, they were running sophisticated financial operations that would make modern offshore accountants weep with envy. And before you judge them too harshly, remember that in an era where tax collectors could legally take your last chicken, your winter grain stores, and possibly your eldest daughter as payment, you probably won't survive this story with your modern moral compass intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing this community span the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the heavy oak doors of the Abbey of Fontevraud in the year 1347, and the first thing that hits you isn't the incense or the echo of plainsong. It's the unmistakable clink of coins being counted in a back room. The prioress, Sister Marguerite, glides past you with a ledger tucked under her arm that's thicker than most Bibles. She's not heading to evening prayers. She's heading to what the nuns call the counting house, though officially it's labeled as the sacristy storage. You follow her down stone corridors that smell of beeswax and something else. Is that fresh ink mixed with the sharp tang of silver polish? The conventional image of medieval nuns as cloistered prayer warriors needs serious revision. These women controlled estates that sprawled across multiple kingdoms, managed international trade networks, and accumulated wealth that rivaled major merchant houses. The Abbey of Quedlinburg in Saxony, for instance, held imperial immediacy, meaning it answered directly to the Holy Roman Emperor, bypassing all those pesky local nobles and their tax demands. Historians still argue whether this was divine providence or incredibly shrewd political maneuvering by the abbey's first abbesses. You watch Sister Marguerite unlock a door with a key that would make a jailer jealous, iron, elaborate, and probably worth more than a peasant's annual income. Inside, the sacristy storage reveals itself as a sophisticated counting house. Wooden tablets covered in wax record daily transactions, while proper vellum ledgers contain the official accounts, the ones tax assessors would see. But you notice something odd. Many of the wax tablets show numbers that don't quite match their vellum counterparts. When you raise an eyebrow, Sister Marguerite merely smiles and mentions something about earthly numbers versus heavenly accounting. The economic power of medieval convents stemmed from a perfect storm of factors. Noble families lovingly placed their excess daughters in convents along with substantial dowries. These dowries included not just coins, but entire villages, mills, forests, and fishing rights. Unlike secular estates that got divided among heirs every generation, convent properties accumulated eternally. Death and taxes might be certain for everyone else, but nuns had found a loophole in at least one of those inevitabilities. The Church's prohibition on clerical marriage meant no legitimate heirs to fragment these holdings. Every asset that entered convent walls tended to stay there, growing like a snowball rolling down an alpine slope. You're starting to understand that these women operated in a unique legal gray zone. Canon law proclaimed religious houses exempt from secular taxation. After all, their wealth served God's purposes. But medieval kings and lords had expensive wars to fund and saw all those convent treasures as tantalizing revenue sources. This created an elaborate cat and mouse game where nuns had to be creative, cunning, and occasionally quite devious to protect their assets. The fascinating part? They usually won. The morning sun barely penetrates the thick glass windows of the convent's scriptorium, but you don't need much light to see that Sister Catherine isn't copying holy texts. She's carefully transcribing numbers from one ledger to another, but the figures keep changing in subtle ways. A shipment of 200 pounds of wool becomes 150 pounds of rough fiber for humble habits. The income from 3 water mills transforms into voluntary donations from grateful pilgrims. You lean closer and notice she's using 2 different types of ink, one that stays permanent and another that fades within weeks. When the tax assessor arrives next month, certain entries will have mysteriously vanished like morning mist. This isn't simple fraud, it's an art form developed over centuries. Convents pioneered double-entry bookkeeping not just to track assets, but to hide them. The official books, written in Latin with gorgeous illuminated capitals, told one story. The working accounts, scribbled in vernacular on cheap parchment or wax tablets, revealed the truth. Some convents maintained the 3 or even 4 parallel accounting systems, one for the bishop, one for secular authorities, one for internal management, and one that recorded actual holdings. A mainstream historical fact that surprises modern readers is that many medieval nuns were more literate and numerate than their male counterparts in secular society. They had to be. Their survival depended on it. Sister Catherine shows you her masterpiece, an accounts ledger for the Abbey of Wilton from 1298. The official version lists modest holdings, producing barely enough to feed the community. But hidden in the decorative marginalia, those intricate drawings of vines and fantastic beasts that medieval scribes loved. She's encoded the real numbers using a system of flowers and leaves. Each petal represents a pound sterling, each leaf a shilling. What looks like artistic whimsy actually records income 5 times higher than what's declared. The bishop who commissioned this beautiful book praised the nuns' artistic devotion, never realizing he was looking at a financial statement in disguise. You're witnessing something that historians still argue whether to call genius or sacrilege: the transformation of religious authority into economic immunity. When a tax collector questioned discrepancies, nuns could claim divine revelation. The Holy Virgin appeared to Sister Agnes in a vision and told her those sheep had been miraculously multiplied, but then sadly taken to heaven before the assessment. Try arguing with that in a world where everyone believed in daily miracles. The fringe tidbit that makes this even better: some convents kept miracle logs that conveniently recorded divine interventions right around tax season. Funny how the Virgin Mary seemed particularly concerned with protecting monastic assets every autumn. The real brilliance lay in making assets literally invisible. Precious metals got melted down and recast as religious objects, tax exempt by definition. Gold coins became chalice decorations, silver transformed into reliquaries. You watch Sister Catherine's assistant arrive with what looks like freshly minted coins. Within hours, they'll be hammered into a new saint's shrine that definitely isn't subject to secular taxation. The process is reversible. Of course, when the convent needs liquid funds, saints' shrines develop mysterious damage, requiring repairs that somehow produce fewer decorations but more available cash. But the cleverest trick involves temporal manipulation. Medieval tax assessments typically happened on specific feast days. Everyone knew when the collectors would arrive. So convents developed elaborate lending networks. In the weeks before assessment, valuable items would go on pilgrimage to sister houses. Livestock would be temporarily donated to grateful peasants who definitely weren't just holding them until the taxman left. Grain stores would be already committed to feeding the poor, documentation available upon request, though somehow those documents were always stored at another convent 3 days right away. You notice Sister Catherine adding a final entry to today's books. She's recording the arrival of a merchant's daughter as a new novice, along with her substantial dowry. In the official ledger, it's listed as spiritual offerings for the glory of God. In her hidden notes, she's calculating how to convert the girl's inheritance into tax-exempt property before anyone notices. The merchant probably thinks he's buying his daughter a place in heaven. He's actually funding a financial empire that would make Venetian bankers jealous. The stone steps descending into the convent's cellars are worn smooth by centuries of secret traffic, and you're about to discover why. Sister Marguerite leads you past the official storage rooms, those pathetic chambers with a few dusty barrels that tax inspectors are shown, and through a hidden door disguised as a collapsed wall. The temperature drops 10 degrees, and suddenly you're in a vast underground complex that smells like a mixture of aged milk, salt, and money. Welcome to what medieval account books never mentioned, the cheese cathedral of St. Rodigan's convent, where wheels of aged gold sit in neat rows like edible coins waiting to be spent. You run your fingers along wooden shelves that stretch back into darkness, each holding wheels of cheese the size of cartwheels. Sister Marguerite taps one with a small wooden hammer, listening to its tone like a merchant testing silver. 14 months, she declares with satisfaction, worth 40 shillings at market, but officially, this cellar doesn't exist. The scale is staggering. You count at least 300 wheels in this chamber alone, and you can see doorways leading to other rooms. At market prices, you're standing in a fortune that rivals the treasury of a minor kingdom, all of it invisible to tax rolls, because technically these are just provisions for the sisters' simple meals. The cheese operation represents medieval nuns' genius for exploiting agricultural exemptions. Convents were expected to be self-sufficient, producing their own food, but nowhere did canon law specify how much food they could produce. So while tax collectors counted sheep in the fields, and took their percentage. They ignored the milk those sheep produced. And if that milk happened to become cheese, well, assessing the value of perishable foodstuffs was notoriously difficult. Historians still argue whether the explosion of distinctive regional cheeses in medieval Europe was driven by monastic communities hiding wealth in edible form or just happy culinary accident. You watch two nuns carefully turning massive wheels, a process that must happen every few days to ensure even aging. They work in silence, but their movements are practiced, professional. These aren't humble sisters making food for sustenance. They're craftswomen creating luxury goods. The particular cheese produced here, Sister Marguerite explains, is made from a secret recipe revealed by Saint Radegund in a vision. It commands premium prices from merchants who ship it as far as Paris and London. The beauty of the scheme is that cheese is simultaneously valuable and consumable. If tax collectors get too nosy, a few strategic feast days can make evidence literally disappear down grateful gullets. The underground complex extends far beyond what seems possible for a modest convent. You pass through chambers where different cheeses age at different temperatures, each variety requiring specific conditions. Some rooms have channels cut into the floor for drainage. Others have ventilation shafts that Sister Marguerite claims are prayer chimneys, but clearly serve to regulate humidity. The engineering is sophisticated enough to impress modern dairy operations. A fringe historical detail that makes this even more impressive. Many of these cheese caves were adapted from ancient Roman sewers and catacombs, meaning the nuns were literally building wealth atop the ruins of empire. But cheese is just the beginning. In adjoining cellars, you discover smokehouses where hams and sausages cure, rooms full of preserved fruits and honey, barrels of pickled vegetables, and, most lucrative of all, chambers where salt fish ages. The nuns have contracts with fishing fleets along the coast, buying catches at harvest prices and storing them until Lent, when demand soars. They're essentially running a commodities market in preserved foods, buying low and selling high while claiming it's all for feeding pilgrims and the poor. Sure, they do feed some pilgrims at prices that would make an innkeeper blush, but that's between them and God. Sister Marguerite saves the best for last, behind a door marked with religious symbols that definitely don't mean keep out valuable stuff inside. You find the export preparation room. Here, cheeses are wrapped in waxed cloth bearing the convent's seal, a mark that guarantees quality and, more importantly, ecclesiastical protection. Any merchant carrying these goods can claim church immunity from road tolls and market taxes. You're looking at medieval trademark protection backed by the threat of excommunication. The systematic way they've commercialized salvation would make modern prosperity gospel preachers take notes. The scent of fermenting grapes leads you through narrow corridors to a part of the convent that officially doesn't exist. You emerge into a vaulted undercroft where massive oak barrels line the walls, each one larger than a merchant's cart. Sister Beatrice, the cellaress, greets you with hands stained purple despite the season being wrong for harvest. She's been testing this year's vintage, she explains, to ensure it's suitable for the Holy Sacrament. The way she says it, with just a hint of slurred satisfaction, suggests she's been very thorough in her theological quality control. You're standing in one of medieval Europe's most brilliant tax dodges, the communion wine exemption. Every parish needs wine for Mass, and canon law specifically exempts sacramental wine from all secular taxes. But here's where it gets interesting. Nobody ever specified exactly how much wine constitutes a reasonable supply for religious purposes. The Abbey of Marmoutier produces enough communion wine to serve every soul in France twice daily, with plenty left over for charitable purposes. Those purposes happen to include selling premium vintages to noble houses, but the paperwork always says sacramental provision. Sister Beatrice shows you the ledgers, and you notice something amusing. The convent's official wine production is listed as 3 barrels for communion, 2 for medicinal purposes. But you've already counted at least 40 barrels in this room alone, and she mentions there are 3 more storage areas. When pressed, she explains that they must account for spillage, evaporation, and angelic portions. Apparently, angels are notorious drunks who steal significant percentages of each vintage. The mainstream historical record confirms that medieval convents controlled many of Europe's premier vineyards, but historians still argue whether this was due to superior agricultural knowledge or just the inevitable result of tax-free compound growth over centuries. The wine operation is vertically integrated in ways that would impress modern corporations. The nuns own the vineyards, operate the presses, control the aging process, and handle distribution. They've even pioneered what might be history's first appellations. Wines from their specific vineyards command premium prices because buyers know the sisters' reputation for quality. The fringe detail that makes this even better? Some convents issued what amounted to wine futures, selling next year's vintage at discount prices to merchants who needed quick silver. They were essentially running a commodities exchange in blessed grape juice. You follow Sister Beatrice to the blending room, where she demonstrates the art of creating different grades of communion wine. The highest quality goes to bishops and wealthy parishes who make generous donations. The second tier supplies regular churches. The third tier, which tastes like it could strip paint, is reserved for tax inspectors who insist on sampling the convent's wares. Even our Lord's blood varied in quality, Sister Beatrice notes piously, pouring you a sample of the good stuff that makes your head spin after 2 sips. Who are we to improve upon divine precedent? The real genius lies in the transportation network. Convents across Europe have negotiated safe passage agreements for their wine shipments. Bandits who might cheerfully rob merchant caravans think twice about attacking wagons marked with ecclesiastical seals. Road tolls that would bankrupt secular traders don't apply to religious supplies. And the sisters have effectively created a tax-free, tariff-free, bandit-protected shipping network that spans from Scotland to Sicily. They move wine, certainly, but also any other goods that happen to fit in wine barrels. You notice one communion wine shipment includes sealed containers that clink like coins rather than slosh like liquid. But the cleverest part? The nuns have cornered the market on communion wine certification. In 1298, the Pope decreed that only wine blasted by religious authorities could be used for Mass. Guess who controls the blessing process? The same convents that produce the wine. They've created a closed loop where they're simultaneously the producer, regulator, and primary consumer of a tax-exempt product. It's a monopoly that would make guild merchants weep with envy, all protected by the threat of eternal damnation for anyone who challenges it. Sister Beatrice offers you another sample, for quality assurance purposes, of course, and you're beginning to understand why medieval nuns lived so much longer than their secular counterparts. Access to premium health care, disguised as communion wine, probably didn't hurt. The pilgrims arrive at dawn, their coins already in hand, before they've even seen what they're paying for. You watch from the gallery as Sister Agnes orchestrates what might be history's most lucrative theatrical performance. She stands before a gilded reliquary containing what's supposedly Saint Agatha's finger bone, though you noticed last week it was Saint Catherine's toe. The pilgrims don't seem to care about anatomical accuracy. They're here for miracles, and Sister Agnes delivers them with the timing of a master dramatist. Just as the morning sun hits the crystal window of the reliquary, creating an ethereal glow, she begins her practiced speech about the saint's healing powers. You're witnessing the medieval equivalent of a franchise operation. This convent doesn't just own relics, it rents them out to other religious houses for a percentage of the donation take. The contract you glimpsed yesterday specified that Saint Agatha's finger, or Catherine's toe, or whoever's appendage it actually is, would spend 3 months at the Cathedral of Rouen in exchange for 30% of all pilgrimage revenues. The cathedral gets a crowd-drawing attraction, the convent gets income without overhead, and everyone pretends not to notice that Saint Agatha apparently had 17 fingers based on the number of authenticated relics in circulation. The relic economy operates on principles that would be familiar to modern entertainment moguls. Hot relics command a premium rental fees. Anything associated with Christ's Passion or the Virgin Mary is gold. Mid-tier saints provide steady income. And then there's the bargain basement, obscure martyrs whose bones rent for a few shillings monthly to rural parishes desperate for any draw. Sister Agnes has a catalog, though she calls it a sacred inventory, listing available relics with their proven revenue history. Historians still argue whether the medieval relic trade represented genuine faith, cynical exploitation, or some complicated mixture of both that our modern minds struggle to categorize. You notice Sister Agnes employing what can only be called special effects. Hidden beneath the reliquary platform, a novice operates bellows that pipe incense through tiny holes, creating mysterious smoke at dramatic moments. Another sister, concealed behind a curtain, provides ethereal singing that seems to come from heaven itself. When a wealthy merchant approaches with a sick daughter, Sister Agnes subtly signals her assistance. The incense intensifies, the singing swells, and, through pure coincidence, surely, a shaft of colored light from a stained glass window illuminates the child's face just as she touches the reliquary. The miracle that follows will be added to the relic's authenticated history, increasing its rental value. The financial innovation extends beyond simple display fees. Convents issue what amount to miracle insurance policies. For a substantial donation, wealthy patrons can reserve priority access to relics in times of crisis. They're essentially prepaying for divine intervention with contracts that specify exactly what class of relic will be made available for what type of emergency. Plague? You'll need at least a saint who died of disease. War? Better secure options on a military martyr. The fringe historical detail that makes this even more audacious? Some convents offered package deals, access to multiple relics for comprehensive spiritual protection, with family discounts available, but the real money comes from the secondary markets. Pilgrims don't just donate to see relics, they buy blessed tokens, tiny lead badges, vials of holy water that touched the reliquary, scraps of cloth that spent a night near the bones. Sister Agnes has turned the gift shop concept into an art form centuries before museums figured it out. The markup on these items is astronomical. A lead badge that costs a penny to produce sells for a shilling. Holy water, which Sister Agnes blesses by the barrel each morning, goes for 3 pence per vial. The cloth scraps are genius. Pilgrims think they're buying fabric that absorbed holy essence, but they're actually purchasing the convent's worn-out habits, recycled into revenue. The afternoon brings a special event, a competitive miracle auction. 2 wealthy merchants, each with sick relatives, bid against each other for exclusive access to the relic. Sister Agnes manages the auction with the skill of a Roman slave trader, dropping hints about another interested party from Paris, mentioning how the Duke of Normandy's son was cured after a generous donation. The bidding escalates until one merchant pledges funding for a new chapel wing. Only then does the relic become available for private veneration. You're watching supply and demand curves play out with salvation as the commodity, and Sister Agnes understands her market better than any Venetian trader. The commotion in the courtyard draws you to a window where you witness an extraordinary scene. 3 tax collectors on horseback are arguing with Sister Marguerite at the convent gates, demanding to inspect grain stores they claim are hidden on the property. Behind the good sister, you notice several peasant families hurriedly loading carts with bulging sacks, while children drive sheep through a back gate. Sister Marguerite clasps her hands piously and insists she knows nothing about any grain. Surely the king's men are mistaken. When they threaten to search anyway, she mentions that the bishop is currently visiting and would be most disturbed by secular authorities violating sanctuary. The taxmen hesitate just long enough for the last cart to disappear down the forest path. You're observing a protection racket that would make Sicilian godfathers jealous, dressed up in religious robes and justified by theological precedent. The system works like this. Before harvest season, peasants donate their expected crops to the convent in exchange for spiritual benefits. The convent issues official documents confirming these future donations. When tax collectors arrive to assess the harvest, the peasants can honestly claim they own nothing. It all belongs to the church. After the taxmen leave, the peasants make a second donation to buy back their crops at a fraction of the tax they would have paid. Everyone wins except the royal treasury. Sister Marguerite invites you to the scriptorium, where she shows you the documentation system. Hundreds of predated donation agreements fill the shelves, each one technically accurate but practically fictional. The mainstream historical consensus acknowledges that medieval convents provided sanctuary services, but historians still argue whether this represented legitimate religious charity or organized tax evasion on a massive scale. The answer, as with most medieval practices, is probably both. The nuns genuinely believed they were protecting the poor from rapacious secular authorities while also taking their cut of the savings. The protection extends beyond simple tax avoidance. Convents offer what amounts to medieval banking services disguised as spiritual transactions. A merchant facing debt collection donates his assets to the convent, becoming a lay brother temporarily. His creditors can't touch church property, so the assets are safe. Once the financial crisis passes, he makes another donation to resume secular life, minus a handling fee. The convent keeps meticulous records of these transactions in code. What looks like lists of prayers and feast days actually tracks complex financial instruments that won't be formally invented for another 2 centuries. You follow Sister Marguerite to the almonry, where the charity distribution takes place. Peasants arrive with empty carts and leave with full ones, but nobody's getting anything for free. Each recipient signs, or marks, for the illiterate, a contract pledging future service to the convent, harvest labor, construction work, carting goods to market. The fringe detail that makes this system even more intricate. Some convents issue transferable service credits. A peasant who owes 10 days of harvest work can trade that obligation to another who needs the convent's protection more urgently. They've essentially created a labor futures market denominated in salvation. The afternoon brings drama when the tax collectors return with reinforcements, including a bishop's representative who theoretically outranks Sister Marguerite. But she's prepared for this too. She produces a papal bull, suspiciously fresh for a document supposedly issued decades ago, granting the convent special immunity from all temporal inspection. The bishop's man examines it closely, while Sister Marguerite mentions, ever so casually, that the Pope is her second cousin and takes family disputes very seriously. Whether the bull is genuine or forged becomes irrelevant. Challenging it would require appeals to Rome that could take years and cost more than any possible tax revenue. While the officials argue about jurisdiction, you notice the real work continuing behind the scenes. Peasant families stream through back gates, depositing harvest goods in hidden cellars and leaving with tokens that guarantee the convent's protection for another year. Children are stationed as lookouts along all approach roads, ready to whistle warnings. The entire local population has been recruited into a conspiracy that frames tax avoidance as religious duty. After all, rendering unto Caesar is all well and good, but rendering unto God through his earthly representatives takes precedence. By evening, the tax collectors leave empty-handed, muttering about ecclesiastical interference. Sister Marguerite celebrates Vespers with particular enthusiasm, and the collection plate mysteriously fills with exactly the amount the crown expected to collect in taxes. Brother Francis arrives at the convent gates just after matins, his donkey laden with parcels that supposedly contain prayer books from the famous scriptorium of Mont Saint Michel. You help unload the packages in the library, but when Sister Catherine unwraps them, you discover something far more valuable than holy texts. These illuminated manuscripts aren't just beautiful, they're financial instruments. Each decorated page contains ownership records for properties scattered across 3 kingdoms. Encoded in the marginalia, a vine border indicates vineyard holdings, while geometric patterns map out rental incomes from urban properties. You're looking at property deeds disguised as devotional literature. The manuscript network represents one of medieval Europe's most sophisticated money laundering operations. Convents commission expensive books from each other, paying vast sums for artistic excellence and spiritual edification. But the real transaction involves property transfers, loan settlements, and investment partnerships that would be taxed or regulated if conducted openly. That illuminated psalter worth £200, it comes with undocumented ownership of 3 mills in Flanders. The Book of Hours that cost a king's ransom, the purchase price actually buys into a shipping venture departing from Venice. You watch Sister Catherine carefully update her own records, adding Brother Francis's delivery to a catalog that tracks manuscripts across half of Christendom. Each book has a visible value, what it's worth as a religious object, and a shadow value representing its true financial significance. She shows you one particularly gorgeous gospel that officially cost £50 to produce. The marginalia reveals it represents £1,000 loan to the Duke of Burgundy, secured against his toll revenues. Mainstream historians recognize that medieval manuscripts were valuable, but they still argue whether the astronomical prices reflected genuine artistic appreciation or disguised financial engineering. The beauty of the system lies in its plausible deniability. Tax assessors can examine these books all day. They'll see only religious devotion expensively expressed. The actual financial records hide in plain sight, encoded in decorative elements that appear purely artistic. Sister Catherine demonstrates her favorite technique, mathematical sequences hidden in the number of leaves on illuminated vines. What looks like aesthetic choice actually records compound interest calculations. The fringe historical detail that makes this even more impressive. Some convents employed Jewish scribes secretly, valuing their mathematical expertise and connections to international trade networks despite official prohibitions. Brother Francis isn't just a courier, he's a walking bank. His circuit connects 23 religious houses, carrying not just manuscripts, but coded messages about market conditions, investment opportunities, and financial intelligence. When he mentions that wheat prices are rising in Paris, every convent on his route adjusts their trading positions before secular merchants hear the news. His donkey may look overloaded with prayer books, but he's actually transporting a financial newsletter with exclusive distribution. The subscription fee? Participation in the manuscript exchange network. You spend the afternoon in the scriptorium watching Sister Catherine create a new piece for the network. She's illuminating an account of Saint Benedict's life, but the real content is a proposal for a joint venture. 5 convents pooling resources to buy a fleet of fishing boats. Each decorative element contains specific information. The golden halos indicate capital contributions. The number of angels represents expected return rates, and the demons being cast out symbolize risk factors. It's a medieval prospectus dressed in religious imagery, and it's beautiful enough that any collector would display it proudly, never knowing they're looking at a business plan. The system's resilience amazes you. When secular authorities occasionally confiscate a manuscript, they capture only the physical book, not the financial relationships it represents. The network maintains duplicate records, encoded differently in other manuscripts. Destroying one book is like burning a single copy of a contract when dozens of backups exist. Plus, who's going to burn a gorgeously illuminated Bible? The public outcry would be devastating. So these financial instruments circulate freely, protected by their sacred camouflage, accumulating value, both artistic and monetary. Sister Catherine finishes another page, adding a border of roses that actually records the conversion rate between Venetian ducats and English sterling. She'll work late into the night, creating beauty that conceals wealth, art that enables commerce, and prayers that compound interest. The bell tower of St. Mary's Convent rises 4 stories above the surrounding countryside, and you're about to discover it serves purposes far beyond calling nuns to prayer. Sister Claudia, the sacristan, leads you up the narrow spiral staircase, past the main bells to a hidden chamber near the top. Here, instead of finding bell-ringing mechanisms, you discover what looks like a military command center. Maps cover the walls, marked with colored pins. A complex system of mirrors and shutters faces every cardinal direction. 2 nuns sit at a table covered with coded messages, translating signals into warnings about approaching tax collectors. You're witnessing medieval Europe's most effective early warning network. Every convent, monastery, and church tower within visual range participates in a signaling system that would make Napoleon's semaphore telegraph jealous. The code is elegantly simple. Different bell-ringing patterns communicate different threats. 3 quick peals followed by silence means royal tax assessors. A slow funeral toll warns of church inspectors. Rapid, celebration-style ringing indicates merchants with goods to hide are approaching. The mainstream historical record mentions that church bells served communication purposes, but historians still argue whether these networks were formally organized or just emerged organically from shared interests. Sister Claudia demonstrates the mirror system, angling a polished piece of metal to catch the morning sun. Within seconds, an answering flash comes from a monastery 12 miles north. She translates, "Bishop's party departed at dawn, heading your way, should arrive by noon." This intelligence is worth its weight in gold, or rather, in hidden gold, which is exactly what the nuns are now busy concealing. You watch as the warning propagates across the network, each tower relaying the message until convents 50 miles away know exactly when and where church officials are traveling. The information collected goes far beyond simple warnings. The bell tower network tracks merchant caravans, notes troop movements, monitors weather patterns that affect harvests, and even spreads news about market prices. Sister Claudia shows you a ledger filled with encoded intelligence, wheat prices in London, wine quality reports from Bordeaux, shipping schedules from Hamburg. The fringe detail that makes this even more sophisticated? Some towers use trained ravens to carry detailed messages when visual signaling isn't enough. The birds know routes between specific towers, creating an aerial postal service that predates official mail systems by centuries. You notice something clever about the warning system's timing. Alerts always seem to arrive just as coincidental religious observations begin. A tax collector approaching. Time for an all-day prayer vigil that requires closing the convent to visitors. Church inspectors coming? What luck. The sisters just entered a period of silent contemplation that prevents them from answering questions. The bell tower intelligence ensures these spiritual emergencies occur with suspicious regularity. Last month alone, the convent experienced 17 different religious obligations that happened to coincide with official visits. But the real innovation is economic intelligence gathering. Sisters stationed in the tower maintain detailed logs of every merchant convoy passing on the roads below. They note what goods are being transported, estimate quantities, and track seasonal patterns. This information feeds into the convent's trading strategies. When Sister Claudia's logs show unusual numbers of wine merchants heading north, the convent quietly increases its wine prices before the shortage hits local markets. They're essentially running a medieval equivalent of insider trading, justified because the information comes from contemplating God's creation from their holy vantage point. The afternoon shift brings news that sends the entire convent into carefully orchestrated chaos. A flash from the eastern tower warns that the king's special commissioners are approaching, the ones with authority to override ecclesiastical immunity. Within minutes, Sister Claudia's bell patterns have alerted every religious house within 30 miles. You watch from the tower as peasants stream toward the convent with cartloads of goods, taking advantage of last-minute sanctuary. Other carts leave through back gates, carrying the most valuable items to sister houses. By the time the commissioners arrive, they'll find a convent that appears barely self-sufficient, its wealth scattered across the network like seeds in the wind. The bell tower intelligence system has once again proved that in medieval Europe, information truly was the most valuable currency, and the nuns controlled the mint. The confessional booth in the convent's public chapel seems ordinary enough. Dark wood, purple curtain, the faint smell of incense and whispered sins. But when Sister Prudence takes her weekly shift as confessor to the merchant wives of the town, you realize you're witnessing intelligence gathering that would make spy masters envious. Through the thin wooden screen, Madame Beaumont is confessing her husband's pride in his new venture, something about exclusive rights to import Spanish leather. She mentions specific numbers, delivery dates, and profit margins, all while seeking absolution for the sin of material envy. Sister Prudence listens with practiced patience, occasionally murmuring about the dangers of greed while mentally cataloging every financial detail. After granting absolution and assigning prayers, she makes careful notes in her personal journal, not about sins, of course, since the seal of confession is sacred. She's simply recording general spiritual trends in the community that happen to include remarkably specific information about local business dealings. The mainstream church position held that confession was inviolate, but historians still argue whether medieval religious houses found creative ways to use penitential intelligence without technically violating sacred oaths. You spend the morning observing the parade of merchants' wives, minor nobles, and wealthy widows who seek spiritual guidance from Sister Prudence. Each brings gifts, coins for the poor box, candles for the altar, sometimes more substantial donations. But the real currency exchanged is the information. A wine merchant's wife mentions her husband's concerns about the upcoming harvest while confessing anxiety. A nobleman's mistress seeks forgiveness for adultery and mentions his plans to raise bridge tolls. A tax collector's mother worries about her son's soul and reveals which religious houses he's been ordered to investigate next. The genius lies in how the intelligence flows. Sister Prudence never directly acts on confessional information. That would be sacrilege. Instead, she shares general spiritual observations with the Mother Superior during their evening discussions. She might mention that the merchant community seems troubled by pride in new ventures, or there's much anxiety about upcoming changes in taxation. The Mother Superior, wise in the ways of interpretation, understands these coded warnings perfectly. Investment decisions, trading strategies, and defensive preparations follow, all based on spiritual guidance that definitely has nothing to do with specific confessions. You notice the confessional schedule is strategically arranged. Sister Prudence hears confessions on market days when merchants' wives are in town. Sister Beatrice takes the Friday shift when fishermen's families discuss shipping schedules. The Italian-speaking Sister Margherita handles visiting foreign merchants. Each nun has been selected for her linguistic skills, social connections, and ability to inspire trust. The fringe detail that makes this even more calculated. The convent maintains detailed genealogies of local families, helping them understand which confessors might hear the most valuable intelligence from which penitents. The afternoon brings a special visitor. The Duke's Chancellor seeks confession while traveling through the region. Sister Prudence is suddenly indisposed, replaced by the Mother Superior herself. Through the chapel wall, you hear muffled conversation that lasts far longer than any normal confession. The Chancellor leaves looking spiritually refreshed, while the Mother Superior immediately summons the senior nuns to council. Within hours, the convent is liquidating certain investments and moving assets to sister houses in neighboring duchies. Whatever sins the Chancellor confessed apparently included enough economic intelligence to reshape the convent's entire financial strategy. But the cleverest manipulation happens with the penances assigned. When Madame Beaumont confessed her envy of her husband's business success, Sister Prudence prescribed charity, specifically donating to the convent's new vineyard project. The penance serves multiple purposes. It transfers wealth from taxable merchant coffers to tax-exempt church property, creates an emotional investment that encourages future information sharing, and positions the convent to profit from intelligence about Spanish leather imports by expanding into wine exports to Spain. Every prescribed prayer, every suggested donation, every recommended pilgrimage advances the convent's economic interests while maintaining perfect theological propriety. The merchants' wives leave feeling cleansed and virtuous, never realizing they've just participated in an intelligence network that would be the envy of Venetian merchants or Medici bankers. The tax assessor arrives on a Tuesday morning when the convent somehow looks more dilapidated than an abandoned barn. You watch from an upper window as Mother Superior Jean greets him in a habit so patched it looks like a quilting project gone wrong. Her shoes have holes that definitely weren't there yesterday, and is that actual dirt smudged on her face? The transformation is remarkable. Just last night you saw her in fine wool, discussing international wine prices with Venetian merchants. Now she's shuffling like a beggar, leading the assessor through carefully choreographed poverty. The tour begins in the refectory, where 12 nuns sit at bare wooden tables, eating what appears to be gruel. You know for a fact that an hour ago they were breakfasting on fresh bread, aged cheese, and honey from their own hives. But those items have vanished into hidden compartments built into the walls. The gruel is actually yesterday's porridge, saved specifically for official visits and theatrically reheated. Sister Agnes even manages to make her spoon tremble as she lifts it, suggesting weakness from hunger. The assessor notes the pitiful scene in his ledger, shaking his head at such obvious destitution. Mother Superior guides him to the dormitory, apologizing profusely for the straw pallets on the floor. The real beds, with their feather mattresses and wool blankets, were dismantled at dawn and hidden in the cheese caves you remember from last week. The nuns have rehearsed this so many times they can transform their living quarters in under an hour. The mainstream historical record confirms that religious houses claimed poverty to avoid taxes, but historians still argue whether the elaborate deceptions were occasional, desperate measures or routine theater. Based on the practiced efficiency you're witnessing, this is definitely standard operating procedure. The pantry visit is a masterpiece of misdirection. Mother Superior opens door after door to reveal nearly empty shelves, some moldy turnips, and a few sacks of inferior grain. She mentions tearfully that they've been living on charity from local peasants, the same peasants who are actually storing the convent's overflow harvest in their barns. The assessor, confronted with such obvious poverty, actually reaches for his own purse to leave a donation. Mother Superior accepts with touching gratitude, never mentioning that his few coins will join thousands of others in the treasury hidden behind what appears to be a solid stone wall. You nearly laugh when they reach the scriptorium, a sad room with 3 elderly nuns copying prayers onto scraps of parchment with obviously worn quills. The real scriptorium, where those valuable illuminated manuscripts are created, has been temporarily converted into a storage room for building materials. And the assessor glances in, sees piles of worthless lumber strategically placed to block the view, and moves on. Those manuscripts, worth hundreds of pounds each, are currently wrapped in oilcloth beneath the woodpile. The fringe detail that makes this even more absurd? Some convents maintained entirely fake, poor buildings, just for inspections, while the nuns actually lived in comfortable quarters elsewhere on the grounds. The piece de resistance comes when they visit the chapel. Overnight, the golden candlesticks have been replaced with pewter, the silk altar cloths swapped for rough linen, and the jeweled reliquaries hidden behind a false wall painted to look like stone. The assessor sees a humble space barely adequate for worship. He doesn't notice that the pewter candlesticks are actually silver with a thin lead coating that will be polished off the moment he leaves, or that the rough altar cloth conceals silk beneath, ready to be revealed with a quick flourish. The entire chapel is designed like a theater set with quick change possibilities. As the tour concludes, several nuns stage a brilliant finale. They accidentally let the assessor overhear them discussing whether to sell their last cow to buy grain for winter. One young novice, actually the daughter of a wealthy merchant, begins crying about missing her family's generous table. Another mentions that Sister Beatrice is too ill to leave her bed, though you saw her this morning directing wine shipments in the cellar. The assessor is so moved by this performance that he reduces his already minimal tax assessment and throws in another personal donation. As his horse disappears down the road, the transformation reverses with military precision. Within an hour, the convent returns to its actual state, prosperous, comfortable, and preparing for the merchant delegation arriving tomorrow to negotiate next season's wine prices. Mother Superior removes her raggedy costume, revealing the fine clothes beneath, and treats the entire community to an extra glass of their best vintage at dinner, served naturally in those golden chalices that definitely don't exist. The miracle begins at Vespers, when Sister Marguerite notices the statue of the Virgin Mary in the side chapel appears to be weeping. By Compline, word has spread to the town, and by dawn, pilgrims are already gathering with their purses ready. You position yourself where you can observe both the statue and the steady stream of donations filling the collection box. The tears are remarkably consistent, flowing just enough to be visible, but never enough to pool or require cleaning. The Virgin's sorrowful expression seems particularly pronounced when wealthy merchants approach, moving them to exceptional generosity. You've seen this before in different forms across 3 convents now: bleeding crucifixes, weeping statues, mysterious lights appearing at convenient times, always just when the convent's finances need divine intervention. The technology varies, but the timing remains suspicious. This particular Virgin has developed her lachrymose tendency just as the convent faces a large payment due on lands purchased last year. Mother Superior Agnes proclaimed it a sign of heaven's concern for their poverty, though you notice she had ordered new crystal vials from Venice a month ago, perfect for holding miraculous tears that sell for a silver penny each. The mechanism reveals itself when you volunteer to help clean the chapel late at night. Behind the statue, a tiny hole connects to a hidden reservoir. During winter, they use holy water that drips slowly through. In summer, when evaporation might reveal the trick, they switch to oil blessed by the bishop. It flows more slowly and catches the candlelight beautifully. The mainstream church position was that God could work miracles through any vessel, but historians still argue whether medieval religious authorities genuinely believed in their manufactured miracles or cynically exploited popular faith. The answer varies by individual, but the account books suggest profit margins were carefully calculated regardless of personal belief. By the third day, the miracle has evolved. The Virgin now weeps only during specific hours, coincidentally, when the chapel is staffed by the convent's most persuasive fundraisers. Sister Beatrice has developed a gift for noticing when the tears flow more freely, always just as she's explaining to wealthy pilgrims how their donations might ease the Virgin's sorrow. The correlation between donation size and miraculous activity is remarkable. Drop a copper penny, and Mary continues her steady weeping. Leave a gold piece, and sometimes, just sometimes, pilgrims swear they see her lips move in blessing. The economic ecosystem that springs up around these miracles fascinates you. Local innkeepers raise prices to accommodate pilgrim traffic. Merchants stock up on candles, rosaries, and food for travelers. The blacksmith starts producing pilgrim badges at triple speed. Everyone profits from the Virgin's tears, creating a vested interest in maintaining the miracle. When a skeptical merchant suggests examining the statue more closely, the local guildmasters quickly discourage such impiety. Bad for business, bad for the soul, better to believe and prosper. The fringe historical detail that makes this even more intricate. Some convents coordinated their miracles to avoid competition, essentially creating a pilgrimage circuit that kept profits flowing year-round between different houses. You witness the miracle's crescendo when the Duke's ailing mother arrives, carried in a litter and accompanied by a purse-heavy retinue. Mother Superior Agnes has prepared carefully for this moment. As the noble lady approaches the statue, the Virgin's tears suddenly turn red, blood mingling with water in a display that sends the crowd to its knees. The Duke's mother rises from her litter, claiming she feels strength returning, whether from genuine faith, psychosomatic response, or simply not wanting to disappoint the expectant crowd. She takes several steps unassisted. The Duke's gratitude manifests as a grant of new lands to the convent, tax-free in perpetuity. But the cleverest manipulation comes in the miracle's retirement. After 6 profitable months, Mother Superior announces that the Virgin has completed her message. The tears slow, then stop, leaving behind only dried salt trails that pilgrims still pay to kiss. The statue is retired to a place of honor, making room for the next miracle. Rumors already circulate about strange lights seen around St. Catherine's reliquary. The Virgin Mary has served her financial purpose and can rest until the next fiscal crisis requires her tears. You help pack away the hidden reservoir system, noting how carefully they preserve it. For historical purposes, Sister Marguerite says, with a perfectly straight face, though you both know it will be reinstalled behind whatever statue next requires divine intervention to balance the books. The parchment trail leads you through a labyrinth of ecclesiastical ownership that would make modern corporate lawyers weep with admiration. Mother Superior Agnes spreads the documents across her desk, showing you how a single vineyard has been sold 17 times without ever actually changing hands. First, the convent of St. Mary sells it to the Abbey of Cluny. Cluny transfers it to the Priory of Mont Saint Michel. From there, it goes to the Cathedral of Reims, then to the Convent of Fontevraud, and eventually back to St. Mary's. Except now it's legally a different property with a clean history and no tax obligations from its original purchase. You're witnessing medieval money laundering through holy channels. Each transfer generates legitimate paperwork, blessed by church authorities and recognized by secular courts. The property never physically moves. The same peasants work the same vines, but legally it's been purified of any inconvenient obligations. Debts attached to the land, gone. Tax assessments, reset to zero. Inheritance claims from pushy nobles, vanished into ecclesiastical ether. The genius is that every institution involved takes a small cut, making them all complicit in maintaining the shell game. Sister Catherine shows you her specialty, the creation of fictional religious foundations. When the convent needs to hide assets, she establishes a new shrine to an obscure saint, someone martyred centuries ago in a distant land. This shrine requires its own legal entity, capable of owning property and accepting donations. The shrine exists only on paper, but that paper is enough to hold lands, collect rents, and shield wealth from taxation. The mainstream historical record mentions thousands of minor religious foundations, but historians still argue whether most were genuine expressions of piety or sophisticated financial instruments. The speed with which these shrines appear and disappear when convenient suggests the latter. The real complexity emerges in the international transfers. The convent maintains relationships with religious houses across Europe, creating a network that predates modern banking by centuries. Need to move wealth from England to Italy? Donate lands in Kent to an English monastery that owes money to a French abbey that has obligations to an Italian convent. Through a series of paper transactions, value flows across borders without a single coin changing hands. The Church's universal structure provides perfect cover. After all, it's just different branches of God's earthly institution settling spiritual accounts. You discover the cleverest scheme in what Sister Catherine calls the perpetual loan structure. The convent lends money to a cathedral at interest, usury being forbidden. They call it voluntary grateful donations. The cathedral lends the same sum to an abbey, which lends it to a priory, which eventually lends it back to the original convent. The money travels in a circle, generating grateful donations at each stop, while the paperwork creates an impenetrable maze of obligations that no tax collector could ever untangle. The fringe detail that makes this even more brilliant. Some circles included Jewish moneylenders as silent partners, their involvement hidden behind Christian institutional facades, creating interfaith financial cooperation centuries before official tolerance. The afternoon brings a demonstration of live asset shuffling when news arrives that royal commissioners are investigating church property holdings. Within hours, the scriptorium erupts into activity. Deeds are rewritten, seals are affixed, and couriers dispatched. By sunset, half the convent's holdings have been donated to other institutions, with secret agreements ensuring their return once the investigation ends. You watch Sister Catherine create backdated documents with practiced ease. The ink is fresh, but the parchment is genuinely old, stolen from ancient books whose text has been carefully scraped away. She ages the new writing with smoke and handling, creating documents that would fool any inspector. The shell game reaches its peak absurdity when you realize some properties exist in multiple places simultaneously. The same vineyard is listed as belonging to three different religious houses, each with perfectly valid documentation. When tax time comes, each institution claims the property belongs to one of the others. When profit time comes, they share the proceeds through charitable donations between sister houses. The property exists in a quantum state of ownership, belonging to everyone and no one, taxable by nobody but profitable to all. As you help Sister Catherine file away the latest round of transfers, you understand why medieval convents lasted so long. They didn't just own land, they owned the very concept of ownership, bending it into shapes that served God and mammon with equal devotion. The garden behind the convent walls appears modest enough, neat rows of medicinal herbs that any religious house might cultivate for healing the sick. But Sister Hildegard, the infirmarian, leads you past the common plantings of chamomile and feverfew to a locked section where the real prophets grow. Here, behind a wall topped with surprisingly sharp stones, she cultivates plants that command prices higher than gold. Mandrake for fertility, belladonna for women's troubles, and herbs whose names she whispers in Latin while glancing around nervously. The bishop thinks she grows vegetables. The tax collector sees only a charitable herb garden. The wealthy women who visit discreetly know better. You help Sister Hildegard harvest poppy sap in the pre-dawn darkness, scoring the seed pods with special bronze knives that never touch iron. The resulting gum will be processed into laudanum, medicine, officially, though everyone knows its recreational uses among nobles who pay premium prices for spiritual visions. The operation runs with pharmaceutical precision. Each plant is documented in code, its yield tracked, its products traced through a distribution network that would impress modern cartels. The mainstream church condemned certain herbs as promoting witchcraft, but historians still argue whether convents actually avoided them or just kept better secrets about their cultivation. The processing happens in the old crypt, converted into what amounts to a medieval drug laboratory. Copper alembics bubble with tinctures, while drying racks hold bundles of herbs worth more than the convent's visible assets. Sister Hildegard demonstrates the delicate art of extracting essence of nightshade. One drop too much and it's poison, just enough and it's a cosmetic that makes pupils dilate attractively. The margin for error is thin, but the profit margins are enormous. Noble ladies pay extraordinary sums for beauty treatments that definitely aren't vanity because they're blessed by nuns and therefore spiritual in nature. The client list reads like a who's who of medieval high society, though it's encoded in medical terminology. The Duchess of Burgundy's monthly breathing difficulties require regular doses of special tea. The Archbishop's spiritual anxieties need tinctures that happen to contain enough alcohol and opiates to tranquilize a horse. Everyone maintains the fiction that this is medical care, not recreational chemistry. The fringe detail that makes this even more audacious: some convents ran test gardens where they experimented with plant breeding, developing more potent strains centuries before anyone understood genetics. They called it encouraging God's creation to fulfill its divine potential. You watch the weekly transaction ritual, a dance of discretion and deniability. Noble ladies arrive for spiritual counseling with Sister Hildegard. They discuss their souls while their maids collect wrapped packages from the porter. Payment comes as donations to the poor, bags of gold left on the altar that somehow migrate to the treasury. The actual poor get bread and basic medical care, funded by a fraction of the drug profits. It's trickle-down economics with literal trickles of laudanum. The most lucrative product isn't even a drug. It's a special tea that prevents pregnancy, worth its weight in silver to noble wives who've produced sufficient heirs and want no more. The international reach surprises you. Dried herbs travel the same routes as those illuminated manuscripts, hidden in false bottoms of book boxes. Sister Hildegard corresponds with infirmarians across Europe, sharing recipes in coded Latin that looks like theological discussion. They've created a continent-wide pharmaceutical network operating under religious protection. When secular authorities occasionally arrest local herb women as witches, the convents quietly absorb their knowledge and customer base. After all, the same herbs that might be diabolic in village hands become holy when blessed by nuns. The cleverest aspect is the medical legitimacy that shields the operation. Sister Hildegard maintains genuine healing services, treating actual illness with considerable skill. Poor patients receive free care, their testimonies providing cover for the lucrative side business. When inspectors visit, they see an infirmary serving the needy, not a drug operation serving the nobility. The account books reflect only charitable donations, not pharmaceutical sales. Even the herb garden's expansion is justified as serving the growing needs of the poor. Though you notice the new sections contain exclusively high-value plants. As Sister Hildegard locks the garden gate behind you, she mentions casually that next season they're adding a new crop, something from the Holy Land that merchants claim has remarkable properties. The Crusades may have failed to secure Jerusalem, but they succeeded in opening new pharmaceutical supply chains. The papal banner arrives on a Thursday, carried by a messenger who looks far too well fed to have ridden hard from Rome. Mother Superior Agnes receives it with theatrical reverence, kissing the seal before reading the contents aloud to the assembled chapter. His Holiness, in his infinite wisdom, has granted the convent of St. Mary's special dispensation from all temporal taxes for the next 7 years in recognition of their holy poverty and charitable works. The timing is remarkable, just 3 weeks after Mother Superior's cousin was appointed Cardinal Bishop of Ostia. The fact that the convent's donation to the papal treasury last year could have funded a small crusade is surely coincidental. You're witnessing the ultimate protection racket, buying diplomatic immunity with spiritual currency. The papal bull is genuine. You can tell by the quality of the parchment and the complexity of the seal, but its authenticity was purchased through a network of bribes, favors, and family connections that would make Venetian merchants jealous. Sister Catherine shows you the correspondence leading up to this moment. Letters to Rome emphasizing the convent's poverty, while simultaneous messages to Italian banking houses authorize substantial transfers. The left hand claims destitution, while the right hand spreads gold like butter on warm bread. The negotiation process fascinates in its complexity. Everything has a price in the papal court, but nothing can be called a price. The convent's gift to support the spiritual works of the Holy Father happens to match exactly what similar exemptions cost other religious houses. The voluntary donation for masses to be said for the souls of deceased sisters equals the going rate for expedited document processing. Even the messenger's traveling expenses represent a carefully calculated bribe. The mainstream church position was that such payments were freely given donations, but historians still argue whether the papal court operated more like a spiritual authority or a protection racket with really nice costumes. Mother Superior Agnes reveals the deeper game when she shows you her collection of papal bulls dating back decades. Some grant tax exemptions, others authorize special privileges, the right to hold markets, to exercise low justice, to collect tithes normally reserved for bishops. Each document cost more than a knight's ransom, but the return on investment has been spectacular. One bull from 1287 giving the convent rights to all treasure found on their lands has yielded surprising amounts of accidentally discovered gold over the years. Another authorizing them to grant indulgences during certain feast days essentially gave them a license to print money. Spiritually speaking, the real mastery lies in playing different authorities against each other. When local bishops get too demanding, out comes a papal bull limiting their jurisdiction. When secular lords press for taxes, the convent produces papal authorization, placing them under direct Roman protection. When Rome itself asks for contributions, Mother Superior mentions her excellent relationship with the Holy Roman Emperor and wonders aloud whether imperial protection might be more advantageous. The fringe historical detail that makes this even more complex: some convents maintained simultaneous protection arrangements with competing anti-popes during schisms, hedging their bets on who would ultimately claim St. Peter's throne. You observe the immediate effects of the new exemption. Tax collectors who were circling like wolves suddenly discover urgent business elsewhere. The bishop, who last month threatened investigation, sends congratulations and a gift of silver candlesticks. Local nobles who were eyeing convent lands deflate like punctured wineskins. The papal banner flies from the highest tower, a silk and gold warning that these nuns have friends in the highest places. The 7-year exemption will be renegotiated in 6. Of course, Rome likes its revenue streams regular, but for now the convent operates with diplomatic immunity that modern embassies would envy. The document's arrival triggers a carefully orchestrated celebration. The nuns sing special prayers of thanksgiving that happen to be audible throughout the town. The poor receive an extra distribution of bread, with repeated announcements about papal generosity. Merchants are informed that the convent, blessed by His Holiness, is open for business with divine protection guaranteed. Within days, New investors approach, eager to place their wealth under the papal umbrella. The bull that cost 10,000 florins will generate 10 times that in new business before its ink fully dries. As Mother Superior carefully stores the document in the Treasury's most secure chest, she's already composing letters to Rome about next year's voluntary contributions to ensure continued papal favor. The cycle of spiritual protection for material consideration continues, as eternal as the Church itself. The young novice taking notes in the convent's accounting room will one day become the abbess of Fontevraud, and she's learning lessons that won't appear in any holy rule. You watch her carefully copying the double-entry bookkeeping system, noting how donations become investments, how prayers translate into interest rates, how poverty vows coexist with wealth accumulation. She's part of a tradition that stretches back centuries and will continue for centuries more. The transformation of medieval tax dodges into permanent religious exemptions that survive to this day. You're witnessing the foundation of a system that will outlive kingdoms, survive reformations, and adapt to every new form of government humanity invents. These medieval nuns aren't just avoiding taxes, they're creating the legal and theological framework that will protect religious wealth for a millennium. Every forged document, every creative interpretation of canon law, every miraculous accounting error builds precedent. When future lawyers argue for church tax exemptions, they'll cite traditions established in convents like this one, never knowing they're invoking the legacy of Sister Catherine's creative bookkeeping and Mother Superior Agnes's theatrical poverty. The evolution is already visible in how younger nuns approach financial management, where the older generation relies on personal relationships and family connections. The novices create systems and procedures. They're standardizing the miracle business, codifying the protection rackets, establishing written protocols for property shells. What began as improvised responses to rapacious tax collectors is becoming institutional knowledge. The fringe historical detail that makes this transformation remarkable. Many of these financial innovations will eventually be adopted by secular banks and trading houses, making medieval nuns inadvertent pioneers of modern capitalism. Walking through the convent one last time, you see how completely the spiritual and material have merged. The chapel where manufactured miracles generate revenue stands next to the scriptorium where financial documents hide as illuminated prayers. The herb garden that grows pharmaceutical profits borders the vineyard producing tax-exempt communion wine. The bell tower that watches for tax collectors rises above cellars full of cheese worth more than most noble estates. Every stone in this holy house serves dual purposes. Every prayer has a price tag. Every blessing carries compound interest. The mainstream historical narrative presents medieval convents as refuges from worldly concerns. But you've seen the truth. They were worldly concerns wrapped in holy veils. These women, barred from secular power by their gender and religious vows, created alternative power structures that rivaled any merchant house or noble court. They turned exclusion into opportunity, restrictions into loopholes, spiritual authority into material wealth. Historians still argue whether this represents corruption of religious ideals or brilliant adaptation to medieval realities. The answer, as always with medieval institutions, is both. The system's sustainability impresses most. Secular estates fragment through inheritance, merchant fortunes vanish in bad trades, even kingdoms fall to conquest. But the convent's wealth protection mechanisms are anti-fragile. They grow stronger under pressure. Every attempt to tax them generates new exemptions. Every investigation produces better concealment methods. Every reform creates fresh opportunities. The nuns have discovered something profound. In a world where everything is temporary, claiming to serve the eternal provides permanent advantages. They've built a 1,000-year tax shelter and called it God's will. As your historical journey through these holy financial fortresses concludes, you understand why medieval convents flourished despite, or because of, constant pressure from secular authorities. They weren't just religious institutions, they were economic laboratories where brilliant women experimented with financial instruments that wouldn't be formally invented for centuries. Every scheme you've witnessed, from the cheese caves to the papal negotiations, represents human ingenuity applied to the eternal problem of keeping what you've earned. The nuns' methods might seem dishonest by modern standards, but in a world where tax collectors could legally take everything, perhaps a little holy fraud was the most ethical response available. The bells ring for Compline as darkness settles over the convent, and you realize these evening prayers serve one final function. While the nuns' voices rise in plain chant, their hands are busy updating ledgers, counting coins, planning tomorrow's schemes. The prayer provides perfect cover for the clink of silver and scratch of quills. It's a fitting end to your journey through this world where the sacred and profane dance together in profitable harmony, where poverty vows enable wealth accumulation, where serving God means outsmarting Caesar at every turn. The medieval nuns have won their game against the tax collectors, and their victory will echo through centuries of religious exemptions yet to come. You've journeyed through centuries of ecclesiastical ingenuity, witnessed financial creativity that would inspire modern accountants, and discovered that medieval nuns were far more interesting than your history books suggested. As you drift toward sleep, perhaps you'll dream of cheese caves and wine cellars, of weeping statues and diplomatic immunity, of women who turned spiritual authority into economic power with a wink and a prayer. Remember those bell tower networks the next time you hear church bells. Someone, somewhere, might still be sending coded messages about approaching authorities. Think of Sister Catherine's double books when you see illuminated manuscripts in museums, wondering what financial secrets hide in those decorated margins. And when you pass a convent's high walls, imagine what might lie beneath: caves full of aging cheese, cellars of valuable wine, or perhaps just nuns who've inherited their predecessors' genius for creative accounting. The tradition continues in evolved forms. Modern religious organizations still claim tax exemptions based on precedents set by these medieval sisters. The arguments haven't changed much. Serving God requires freedom from secular obligations. Charity work justifies financial privileges. Spiritual purposes transcend material assessments. Every time a church avoids property tax or a religious organization claims diplomatic immunity, they're invoking principles perfected in medieval convents, where necessity mothered invention and poverty vows permitted infinite accumulation. So close your eyes and let the stories settle like sediment in wine, aging into dreams. Perhaps you'll find yourself in a medieval garden where herbs worth fortunes grow in neat rows, or in a scriptorium where every illustrated vine conceals compound interest calculations. Maybe you'll hear the splash of coins being counted in a darkness that smells of incense and silver, or feel the weight of account books that tell different truths to different readers. Sweet dreams of holy schemes and sacred prophets, of women who played the longest game and won. The bells have fallen silent, the candles are extinguished, and somewhere in the darkness, a medieval nun is still counting coins and smiling.